Guys, this is Chris with Omnidek, and I thank you for exploring our knowledge base and our tutorial for getting your Omnidek system set up. A prerequisite to this session, which we're actually going to explore the form designer, kind of the overview of how to start building forms. You're going to want to go and research and watch the setting up your data and configuring your sequences section. Those are good prerequisites to getting to build the form. That way you're not inhibited when you're building the form. So go ahead and get your data set up first, get your sequences set up if those are required for the forms that you're building. Go ahead and watch those videos first and then jump into this form designer. Now, what I'm going to do here is just to kind of give some nice examples of kind of what a form designer could potentially look like here. Let's say, for example, I wanted to build a form for employee performance review. You'll see there's different questions and answer types in here. These are pick lists, so those simple lists that we set up previously in the data section or in the data video. These are going to be available here. You'll see date pickers here as well. So these are calling the different formats for calendar, time and date stamp and whatnot. You'll see larger blocks. So these are text areas versus more simple blocks, which are just text boxes. So smaller character opportunities there for helping you gather the data that you'd like. You'll see instructional questions here, like, okay, let's agree on 3 to 5 development goals for the next period. That's an instruction. It's not related to any question that you're supposed to answer. It's just to help guide through the form experience. You'll see here section headings. These are called titles in the system. You'll also see some of this text here, which kind of helps you coach through the form. So, steps to meet this particular goal. Please list the specific steps you will take to meet this goal, and benchmarks you'll be able to measure your achievement on. These are kind of helper text in the form that we set up. Now you'll see this has a tab here, so I can actually duplicate. So this is actually a duplicatable section here in the system as well. So I'll kind of get into how we set those things up. Even down here into the signature boxes and whatnot that you may want to create signing opportunities with. So a base form here, this is how I set it up. This is what it looks like kind of once I've gone ahead and gone through the publishing part of it. So to kind of show you how do we go and start this form designing process, I'm going to go over here and click the form designer. And then I'm given 3 elements and 3 opportunities. The first of which is not ready yet, but it'll be available in fall of 2019. This is a library or a marketplace, if you will, of just pre-built business forms that you can use to kind of help accelerate the onboarding process, maybe get some good ideas to get started. They're all free, so we definitely encourage you to pull down as many of those as you want and help maximize the value of the Omnidek platform for your company. Now, if I've already started to build forms, I can come in here into the form and select forms that I'm kind of in process with or things that have already been published. I can also build one from scratch with a blank canvas. Now, to show you a couple of the elements on how to kind of manage a form, I'm going to go ahead and go find that employee performance review, and I'm going to edit this. This is what it looks like in the canvas. So to kind of go left to right, I'm going to kind of walk through. You'll see this is the name of the form in the system. This is the name of the form as seen by the user that's filling it out. So if I was potentially inviting an external person in here, I may want this to be separate. We deliberately separate the name of the form in the system to the name here. So if we said this employee performance review is something more kind of cutesy, I guess. It was like, hey, we want you to grow or something like that, right? You can change it here. So now the form, maybe the display, if I'm going to distribute this or bring people into it, I can actually change that function, but without changing the form name inside of the actual system. Now, to walk through kind of left to right, I'll come here to this widget. This widget allows me to put these forms in particular categories, just like folders in a folder structure. If I don't see the one that this form goes to, maybe this is the first HR form we've built or something like that, then I can come in here and click the little plus button and add a new category and then assign that form to that category. You'll also see allow edit post completion. Now, this isn't something that it's always set to default no, but this is a really important feature if we're going to use like kind of for inner office only functions, like maybe there's a section that just accounting sees or a section that just HR sees, maybe track something. They may want to edit that or go back to it to change its status, or like, for example, payment received on a new sales service order, right? Or something that we can kind of track what's in receivables or whatnot inside of the system. So you can turn this on if you wish. The restriction there is that only certain people can see certain questions. So you may restrict that particular status question to only the administrators, only the kind of the owners of that process. Then they can change the status, and that can help them with their reporting function on seeing all the things that are, approved status or unapproved status or something like that. Now, configure data security. You actually won't see this until you've actually saved your work. This button will appear. To kind of go through this, there's some more advanced videos that we go into the data configuration, but I'll go through this real quickly at a high level. If you think about a form in its lifespan, I can either fill it out, which is create a form submission. I can report on it, which is create an insight, and then I can share that data potentially with other people, right? So those are the three functions that someone would have inside of the system. So let's say, for example, I just want to give everybody the ability to just access it. It's like an observation form, or it's a PTO form or something like that. Everybody can fill it out, right? So if I wanted to do that, I could simply just do a select all, and then everybody gets all of the rights. Now, this is me setting it at an organizational level. So let's say, for example, I just wanted to give the owners here the ability to create a form submission. Okay, then I could come in here and just check that off here. If I wanted to see all of the things that the owners can do, I can say, okay, they can submit a form submission, but I don't want them to be able to report on it or share it. So this is me configuring for that particular organizational structure that all the people in the owners group, they can only submit this form. If I didn't want to do it at an organizational level, but I want to do it as a user level, the same logic is true. So it's either or, right? You can set it at the user level, you can override it even if they are in a particular organization, but you still want to give them the ability to report on it because maybe they're also a safety supervisor and they need to see that information. Then we would actually on an individual level go in here. So regardless of how we want to set it up, whether it's on an individual level or if it's on an organizational level, you can do that from the screen and save your changes. Now, I do want to tell you, it is important if you're going to set this up, if you're going to set this up on an organizational level, it's more impactful because what you're doing is you're creating an organizational template, if you will. So anybody that lives inside of that organization, and I'll kind of, just for reference sake, I'll kind of jump in here and show you what I'm talking about. In the hierarchy of the system, anybody that resides in this organization is going to have those rights to submit a form, report on forms for that form, and then also share it. So if I restricted access at an organizational level, anytime I get a new employee and I put them in this organizational bucket, they're going to inherit that. So I actually don't have to go through that step of individually assigning out those forms to that particular person if I do it at an organizational level. So I definitely encourage you to do it. Build your hierarchy, which there's another video of how to set that up. Set up your hierarchy and then assign those control points on the organizational level. And that way it's very easy to manage that moving forward just by adding new employees to that particular organizational bucket. Now, once I've configured my data security, I now have access to it. So if I wouldn't build a form, I don't see it anywhere. It's because I probably haven't done this step. So I haven't configured data security. So it's very important. If you're just testing it out, just go ahead and click data security. Go to yourself if you don't want to share with anybody just yet. You just want to go to say it's Chris, this is me, and I want to give me access. Just turn my access on, and it's just so I can go in there and actually see the form. If I check this, I'll see it. If I don't have it checked, I'm not going to see it. Continuing on over here, this is the sort function. So these questions are engage and disengage. So if I engage in sections, you see this little ellipsis over here. I can drag and drop and move these sections around to reorganize it in a particular format that I want. So this is important here. If I want to kind of reorganize kind of the placement of the forms up here, I can do that. If I disengage here in the section, let's say, for example, now this next section is the sort function. So from here, you'll see if I engage in the section, I have this ellipsis where I can kind of drag and drop these things and move them around if I need to. I can also disengage in this and engage in the question level, and then now I have this little movement function where I can move the questions in a particular order inside of a section. Now there is a limitation. You can only move questions around inside of the section that you put them in. So if I needed to maybe say I want department to be down here, I can't move it from this section to this section. I can only delete this question here by hitting the trash can and then adding it back to as a new question series on this particular form. So you can't actually move them between categories. So if I disengage here, that goes away. Now, I can also preview this on a device and see what this looks like here on a phone, a tablet, or a desktop. I can make a form active or non-active either by configuring data security or by simply checking this box, say, hey, I just don't want anybody to have access to this anymore. The two most important functions in the form designer is actually the save and the publish function. We deliberately make this a two-step process because we want you to be able to go build a form, go test it out before you publish it, so you can very easily just say, I don't like this form, I just want to delete this question. It's very easy to delete. Once we've published, you can't delete a question because you may have submitted data, because when you publish it, it creates all the data tables behind the scenes. So we don't want to orphan that data just because you want to delete that question. So what you're limited to once you've published it is you can only hide the question and then add new questions to it. You actually can't even change data sources either. So if I've already got this employee looked up, hooked to this data type, if this was a published form, this would be grayed out and I couldn't actually change the data source for that particular question. So it's definitely important. Go ahead and save the form, give yourself access to it, play around with it, make sure the calculations are the way you want, the layouts the way you want, make the modifications in save state, and then publish for most optimal use. If I just want to delete this form because I'm kind of done with it and I didn't like it after I got done, if I'm building it, I want to start over, I can simply delete here under actions, and then I can also go back to the start here, and then now I'm back to my opportunity to create a new canvas. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and build a new form, and we're going to go through just kind of the definitions here on the left side. These are all the different answer types. This is my canvas, and these are the attributes here of this particular question and answer series. So let's say, for example, here, this is the header. Every form is going to have a header. This is where I'm going to kind of rename the form. I'm going to give it a form name, obviously, for the system. This is going to show date and time. This is the date and time. This is the actual date and time. So it's just for reference sake when you're filling out the form, you know what time it is or what today's date is. You can have that for reference sake. You can also just hide this section altogether if you wanted to do that as well. You'll notice this is kind of the main characteristic of the form designer. Each question has properties, right? And they vary based upon the question and answer type. So let's go ahead, for example, I'm going to set up a 2-column question here. This gives me the opportunity to set up a section name. This is an internal descriptor that helps us organize in the form designer, as well as the reporting agent. So that inside of the insights, let's say, for example, I want to go into my expense report. You'll see here that these section names here, although I don't have many on here, this is where they would kind of help you organize this in the reporting designer as far as what sections of the form these question sets are in. So it helps you kind of organize it here in that system. So once I set this up, I've now got 2 destinations to be able to drag and drop questions and answers into. So let's say, for example, I'm just going to kind of start here. I mentioned kind of the descriptive function. So the title here, let's say, for example, I want to add another section here. This is going to be the labor section. This is where I could come in and put a title in this section here. And let's say I call it here, and this could be field labor. This is now going to title this section. So it helps to kind of visually see a separation in here. So you get a line underscore as well as the name. You can obviously change the color here if you wish. You can make it regular or bold. You can left align it, right align it, or center it. You can also increase the text size as well if you wanted to do that as well. So Titles are pretty straightforward. Instructions are very similar. This just gives you the ability to type a big instructional paragraph on how best to fill out the form. You get the same type of criteria of being able to change the text color and whatnot. So this is just designed obviously to mimic legalese or some kind of paragraphical information that's already on the form. You just copy and paste that into this section, and you can have a nice instructional section here, which could say fill out all the labor correctly and make sure everyone has 8 hours. This now shows me my instructions. So these questions are not meant to be answered. Now, if I want to kind of start at the top, text boxes here, let's say I drag it in here. This is where I can actually come in and put the reference name and the caption. So to kind of show you what we mean by reference name, the reference name and the caption, although they're the same, they're like the caption is actually the question. So let's say this is what was the reason for visit? Okay, this could be the question, right? Well, this might be long in regards to looking at it in a report. So if I were to go here, I may want to shorten that particular question, because if I want to see it in a data point, you see how this says, merchant, date, employee. They're truncated versions of that question because they fit better in a grid. So you may have a long question that you may just want to nickname. So what was the reason for visit could be reason underscore visit. Right, so now when I'm looking at it in the grid, I actually see, even though it's a long question, I don't want the whole long question in the report that I have. I just want to have a reference of what this question was. So we allow you to kind of give this a little bit of a shortened nickname, which helps you see it in the report designer. So this is very important. You definitely don't want to just call these things tests, because you won't be able to tell what those are in the actual report designer. So definitely be conscious of this. This is also going to be the headers that we use to the API to pull in information. So we definitely want to make sure that those kind of make sense for our developers that we're potentially doing this work internally or in our Omnidek customer experience department. Now, placeholder text, this is where we can come in and actually give instructions. So I could say, make sure to use details of visit. Here. This now kind of instructs them on how best to fill out the form. Okay, so this is in the text box as well as the text area function. So it's just a good helper ways of helping get through the form itself. Now, text area, very similar to text box. Obviously, it's just got more place for that information. You can up the character limit. It's default by 500, but you can up it to 750 if you wanted to. You can use spell check, which will check it in the system as well. And then again, you can hide the question from that too. Form references are on each. I'll kind of get into where that looks like in the numeric section. If I come back in here, I'm going to remove this question again, and I'm going to come in and put a number question. The number question is the most complex piece of our puzzle. This is where we can actually do complex math through expressions here. So obviously, form reference and the caption are all the same, the weighting and whatnot. Default values, if I always want this to be 0, anytime you open up the form, it'll always say 0, or I can default it to something else. I can change the format into a currency or decimal or a round number, or percentage. So it handles any kind of number structure, whatever the purpose might be. So if we are doing tax rates or markup rates, it could be a percentage. If it's going to be a total amount, it can be formatted to be in a currency. Now, the best way of kind of showing you what this looks like here for referencing is to show you a form that already has some calculations on it. So for example, if I were to go into the form designer and I'm going to go find my expense report here, this will show you how we use the numbering structure. So in this expense report, I actually pull in an amount of a purchase, right? So what I do here is that, so it's defaulting here, the formatting is in a currency here, and then I simply give it a reference. And this is the same way that like Excel does. When I put data into a cell, it's in cell A1, for example. Well, our system doesn't have a grid, so it doesn't have a frame of reference. So you actually have to just give it a nickname, and you'll give it kind of a two-part expression, so like a alphanumeric, like an A1 or A2, or we use it to kind of EX as like the expense amount. So at EX, you're limited. You only get two characters here, so you'll give it a form reference. Now, this isn't doing math, so I don't have an expression in here, but this is a reference in a calculation down below. So I'm going to need to be able to pull that amount to do the question, just like I would do cell A1 plus cell A2. So when I go down here, that's my expense amount. When I go into my mileage reimbursement, this is going to be another math question. So this is at mileage total, right? So I did this at MI, so this is my mileage. The math equation for this one is now my mileage at MI times my reimbursable amount, which is 0.54 cents. So this calculation here in this expression, just like Excel, where I do cell A1 times a particular amount or whichever else, I'm doing the expression here, which when I enter in my mileage, it's going to do the math and give me my reimbursable amount based upon this calculation here. Now, to sum all this stuff up, I'm going to take that top reference of EX, which we set here, and I'm going to come down here and I'm going to add up the expense amount plus the number from the mileage reimbursement here. And that's going to give me my total. So we do that by building the reference here to reference the amount, whatever gets filled in that particular question. And then we do our math equations here through the expression. And you've got some helper text here that can kind of help you guide through it. But this is how we set up math. So these numeric questions can be very, very dynamic. You can create these for all sorts of different calculations and markups and employee scorecards. But the numeric question has a lot of flexibility to it. And it all stems from the ability to be able to give these particular questions cell references and then also expressions as destinations for math equations. Now, the date picker is actually date and time and date and time. So over here in my profiles here, I have the ability to change it to date, time, and date and time. If it's a date section, when I click this is going to be kind of a roller, which is easy on a phone. But if I say, you know what, I don't like the roller, I actually want to go to a calendar view, I can simply click the calendar and now my entry point changes. So you can actually have the freedom of kind of checking, you know, which way to enter in time makes the most sense. If I get into a time section here, I can actually change the time intervals to every minute or 5, 10, 15, or 30-minute intervals. Also date and time as well gives me kind of embedded version of that. So to kind of show you what that looks like here, I get the time and the date all collected in one answer type. So all of this function here for date is very straightforward. You've got a lot of flexibility in how you want to gather either a clock in, like if it's just a time element, or if it's a date, like a calendar picker. Now, yes, no buttons are really just true and false. You can actually come in here and actually change it from yes, no to, you know, true and false. Or you can actually nickname this to, you know, open, closed, whatever else. So you have this option here to kind of change how you want this selection opportunity to go. Now you may find that, okay, well, it's not really yes, no, I have a yes, no, and NA. Well, if that's the case, then what you want to do is actually use the assets, the pick lists, and put as many of those variables as you want. And instead of having a button, it's actually just a pick list of all the variations that you want. Continually exploring these answer types here. Signature boxes are pretty straightforward as well. By default, this is just the question that I want them to, you know, this could just be, you know, customer signature here, and they just sign it. You could say, well, I want them to acknowledge something. So you could actually say, okay, I want to use an agreement. So they have a checkbox, so they cannot sign it until they check that box. If they uncheck it, then it actually goes, they can't sign it. So it kind of forces them to do it. This is where you could put in, you know, I agree to this. Oop, do this here. So they have to acknowledge this legalese. I can also link it to a particular URL or a place out in the system that might have like an agreement or something like a PDF or certain external link. I can put that there, and then that link would be here so they can click on it, review the document, close the document, and then go ahead and sign it to agree that they've read the terms and conditions or whichever else. So you've got a lot of functionality here as well. Now, kind of moving on, image uploader and file uploader. These are pretty self-explanatory. These are going to call the camera if it's a phone or the library of the device, if it's on a tablet or whatnot. It'll also call the library here as well. If I click on this, it'll pull the library out of the desktop so I can attach forms or pictures to this. Images support images, so JPEGs, PNGs, whichever. The file uploads will support any other file type, so a PDF, an Excel document, or whichever else. So generally, if you have kind of an expense report, but sometimes your receipts are emailed to you, you want to put both of those question types on the particular form. Now, I'm going to skip over TC summation. I'm going to come back to that in just a bit. If I come into media, media is a real cool piece of this. You can actually, it comes with a title, so you can actually title it, but then you can copy and paste a media URL into here. And what that looks like kind of in progress here. So let me come and I'll show you an example here. Here. So this would be an example of how we can embed a video into our form and then maybe put some questions in here. So you could actually have like, you know, a bunch of like kind of new employee onboarding. You can embed a video so they kind of say, hey, welcome to the family or whichever else, maybe Toolbox Talks videos or training sessions that you want them to go ahead and watch all the way through. This is where you can do that. So if you publish your own videos, maybe to YouTube, for example, you can do that and then embed those into the system here for that function. Now to come back into here, I'm going to just give this another section. All right, so now sequence. These are the sequences that we set up a little bit earlier in that other video. This is where like we're going to do a PO number. We can set up different sequences. So it's going to be picking the different next PO number up or next work order number, RFI number, whichever else. So it's just an auto increment sequence. So I definitely encourage you, go check out our sequences section to kind of see the flexibility that you have with using sequences. Our GPS stamp as well. This is if I did want to have a GPS stamp on this particular form. When I submit it, I can drag and drop this pretty easy on the form. They just engage with it and it'll mark their latitude and longitude. And then this can be access to the API to kind of give you a nice report on where these activities were happening, where these timesheets were submitted, and so on and so forth. So this is the base function of all the basic questions. We're going to have a subsequent video about assets, but one last little piece to this is the TC summation. The TC summation is designed to calculate up a secondary part of our forms, which we call features. Now, features is the ability to have duplicate transactions on a particular form. Almost all forms kind of have this function. So let's say, for example, I want to pull in a section here that has a duplicatable section for maybe purchases, for example. To kind of show you what this would look like here in action. If I were to come into like this little time card, for example, you see how the sequence here of you know, the date here, the pay code, whichever it is, you know, work order numbers, start and end time, whatever else. I can duplicate these sections. Well, what I may want to do, and this is where TC summation comes into play, is let's say, for example, I did 5 hours here, and then 5 hours here, and then 5 hours here. We can use a TC summation to actually calculate up these numbers here so I can get a grand total of all the duplications. So what that looks like back in the system is that I would come back into the form designer, and let me go ahead and select that time card. So I've got my duplicatable section here. So this is going to do my math to be able to calculate out these questions. Well, the TC summation is going to have to be in a separate tab. So this is kind of more like the total section, right? Or the grand summary or whatnot. The TC summation type allows us to go select which questions to sum. And these are going to give you only the numeric, these here, which are doing the calculation. So you see this is a numeric type. That's good. This is at T3, right? That's the reference here. And this right here is the hours section. So when I come back into my totals, I see that these hours worked. This is the only one that's available to me in a duplicatable category to add up. So if we had multiple duplicatable categories for expenses and then travel mileage, I could actually do a calculation. I would add both of those up together, for example, but I would do that through a TC summation for both the expense category as well as the mileage category. And then I could do a grand sum with a numeric that would add them all up together. So that's kind of more of the slightly more complex, but it's just if a particular form has a duplicatable option where I'm going to be duplicating transactions, this is how we would do that using the TC summation and a duplicatable category, which is underneath the features section. Now, you'll also notice that there's a section called clusters. We actually don't have anything in there just yet. This will be coming later on in the year in 2019. But this is where we come out with more advanced ways of capturing data like crew-based time, materials that are maybe more voluminous. So maybe the single transactions might be too much. We might need a grid type function. We can create little small UI elements that just kind of ease the process of entering in information. And this is going to be coming soon. And these are all going to be free. These will be accessible through the marketplace as well. You can bring in clusters into your system as well. So this is the basic functions of the form designer. Hopefully this was helpful. You've got a lot of functionality here in regards to being able to build whichever forms you want. However the questions and answers lay out today, you can do that here inside of the system fairly easily. So I definitely encourage you, go ahead and explore the next section, which is going to be where we explore assets and how we can link data tables to forms, and we can create new assets from the forms. We can use asset details and lists to better populate the forms for selection criteria. So we'll get into that here shortly. So thank you for taking a look at this kind of basic form designer overview. Definitely encourage you to continue exploring and continue building forms inside of your Omnidek system. Thanks so much.